At my daughter's wedding she looked at me and said, "Some people matter. Others just take up space, right, Mom?" Everyone laughed. I smiled and said calmly, "Good thing I just bought my own home, 2,000 miles from here. Don't worry, you'll never see me again." Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The 5 o'clock alarm didn't so much wake me as it released me. I hadn't been sleeping. I rarely did, not really. I just rested my eyes. The digital clock on the small chipped bedside table glowed a weak red, the only point of color in the pre-dawn gray of the guest house. My room, my polite, quiet 400-square-foot prison. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The hardwood floor, a cheap laminate that Donovan had put in last year to upgrade the property, was cold under my bare feet. I didn't bother with slippers. The cold was a good reminder. It kept me sharp. Outside the window, across a perfectly manicured expanse of dark dew-covered grass, the main house was asleep. It was a monster of glass and white stone, 3 stories of cold architectural arrogance. It was my daughter's house, and it was waiting for me. My name is Esther Williams. I am 68 years old, a widow, and for the last 5 years I have been the unpaid invisible engine that runs that house. When my Robert died, God rest his soul, the silence in our small paid-off bungalow was deafening. Corinne, my daughter, had swooped in, her face a mask of practiced dutiful grief. "Mom, you can't be here all alone," she'd insisted. "I need you. Leo needs you." Leo, my grandson. He was 3 then. That was the bait, and I took it. I sold the bungalow, the house Robert and I had built, the one with the porch swing and the rose bushes he'd babied for 30 years. I put the money away, a quiet secret nest egg that Corinne never bothered to ask about. She assumed, in her new world of effortless wealth, that the money was, well, she didn't assume, she simply didn't think about it at all. "We have a guest house, Mom," she'd said, as if she were offering me a permanent vacation. "It's private. You'll have your own space, it'll be perfect." And for the first year it was, but then Corinne's first marriage fell apart. Her starter husband, as she called him, was gone, and suddenly she was a single mother. And I, conveniently located 50 yards away, became the default. "Mom, since you're here, Mom, could you just—" "Mom, Leo's daycare is a fortune, and honestly you're so much better with him." And then, 2 years ago, Donovan Shaw had entered the picture, and the guest house stopped being a convenience and became a requirement. "Corinne, darling," I'd overheard him say on the patio one night, his voice a smooth, confident baritone, "we need our privacy. It's wonderful that your mother is so present, but we need a boundary." The boundary was the 50 yards of grass. I was no longer a grandmother living on the property. I was the help. I pulled on my old chenille robe, the one with the frayed cuffs, and opened the guest house door. The air was cold. The automatic sprinklers hissed, wasting water on grass that was already perfect. I walked the path to the main house, my key sliding into the back door lock with a quiet, practiced click. The house was sterile, silent, and smelled faintly of lavender and plug-in air fresheners. I went to the massive stainless steel kitchen first. I was not there to make my breakfast. I was there to lay out the uniform for my grandson Leo. He was 8 now. He was my heart. He was the anchor that held me here. And today I had to lay out his tiny suit, because today my daughter was getting married, and I was the first one awake. The clock on the ridiculous oversized microwave read 5:45 a.m. I had just finished starching the pocket square for Leo's miniature tuxedo. This was the work, the real work. Not the cooking or the cleaning, but the work of loving a child who was being raised by a committee of strangers. His mother, my daughter, was the CEO of his life, a woman who managed his schedule but never ever sat on the floor to play with his blocks. That was my job, and it was the only job I'd ever loved. At 6:30 I heard him, the sound of bare feet thumping on the oak staircase. He wasn't supposed to be up for another hour, but he knew my schedule. "Grandma," his little voice echoed in the cavernous, white marble foyer. I stepped out of the kitchen, wiping my hands on my robe. "I'm here, baby." He ran to me. He was a streak of Spider-Man pajamas, all wiry limbs and messy hair. He bypassed the living room, where his mother was asleep on the sofa, a silk eye mask on, her phone still buzzing on the floor. He ran straight to me and slammed into my legs, his arms wrapping tight around my waist. "I had a dream," he whispered into my robe. Was it the bad one? The one with the shadow? He nodded. I knelt, my old knees cracking in protest, and held him. He smelled like sleep and little boy sweat. Well, that shadow's a fool, I said, rubbing his back. He doesn't know who he's messing with. You're a Williams. We don't run from shadows. We are the shadows. He giggled, his fear broken. Can we have pancakes? The real ones? The real ones. I promised. Not the kind that come in a box. Corinne, my daughter, was a woman who believed motherhood was a series of managerial decisions. She ordered stuff. She outsourced. She found the best tutors, the best camps, the best organic, pre-made, gluten-free lunch delivery services. She was raising a perfect, optimized, and deeply lonely child. I was the one who taught him how to tie his shoes. I was the one who sat with him when he had a fever, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth. I was the one who knew the shadow was his name for Donovan's yelling. I was making the pancake batter from scratch, my Robert's recipe, when Corinne finally stirred. She sat up on the sofa, a mess of tangled hair and last night's designer pajamas. She was beautiful, my daughter, sharp-boned and sleek, a pale, polished version of my own features. But that beauty had turned inward, become a hard, selfish thing. She looked at us, me in my frayed robe, Leo sitting at the counter in his pajamas, happily kicking his legs, her face puffy from sleep and champagne tightened. Leo, what are you doing up? You're going to be exhausted for the wedding. Her voice was a rasp. Grandma's making pancakes, he said, not looking at her. Mom, she snapped at me. Pancakes? Today? He'll spill syrup all over his suit. What are you thinking? He's not in his suit, Corinne. He's a child. He's hungry. Just give him a bar. One of those protein bars. And I need coffee. Not the drip, the Nespresso. The black pods. She didn't say please. She hadn't said please in 5 years. Leo's face crumpled. I don't want a bar. I want Grandma's. Leo, don't, Corinne said, her voice dropping to a dangerous warning. Don't start, not today. Today is my day. Do you understand? Leo's eyes filled with tears. He looked at me, his lip trembling. I put the bowl down. I walked over to him, put my hands on his small shoulders and kissed the top of his head. I'll save the batter, I whispered. We'll have them tomorrow, your special day. He nodded. Defeated. I turned to my daughter. He needs his mother, he's scared. Corinne rubbed her temples. He's fine. He's just spoiled. You spoil him. Now please. My coffee. And then you need to get the steamer for my veil. It's in the garment bag. Don't use the high setting. It's silk. She sank back into the sofa, already picking up her phone, her thumbs scrolling. The screen lit up her face, bathing her in a cold blue light. She was alone, in a house full of people. Leo and I looked at each other. He was the anchor. He was the burden. He was the love. And he was the only reason I was still here, walking to the ridiculous $1 million espresso machine, to serve my own child. At 9 a.m., the house, which had been in a state of quiet, tense preparation, was shattered by the arrival of the groom. The front door opened without a knock. He had his own key, of course, and Donovan Shaw strode in. Donovan was not a man, he was a performance. He was 40 years old with a gym-sculpted body, a predatory smile, and a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He was charisma without warmth, a hollow, polished, expensive shell. He worked in finance, in that vague, terrifying way where money was the product, and he was very, very good at his job. He strode into the foyer, his overcoat slung over one arm, a leather briefcase in his hand. Corinne, he boomed, his voice bouncing off the marble. Your king is here. Corinne, who had been screaming at a florist on the phone, transformed. Her entire body, which had been coiled like a snake, went soft, pliant, and girlish. Donnie, baby, she cooed, running into his arms. I was coming down the stairs, carrying a basket of steamed linens. Donovan and Corinne were locked in a kiss that was not for them. It was for an imaginary audience. It was a pose. When they broke apart, Donovan saw me. He did not smile. He did not nod. He did not acknowledge me as a person. He simply held out his overcoat. He didn't look at me. He was still talking to Corinne, his eyes on her, but his arm was extended, the heavy cashmere coat dangling from his fingers, waiting. I stopped on the stairs. I was holding a basket of linens. I was his fiancée's mother, and he was waiting for me to take his coat. My heart went very still. This was the dynamic. In this new world, Corinne was building. I was not a mother-in-law. I was a coat rack. I walked down the remaining stairs, my face a polite, neutral mask. I did not take the coat. I simply walked past him toward the laundry room. Mom, Corinne hissed, her voice a sharp embarrassed whisper. Donovan's coat. I stopped. Donovan finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, not angry, just cold. Esther, he said, his voice flat. Be a dear. My coat. It wasn't a request. I stood there for a long second. The linens in my basket were heavy. I could feel Leo, who was in the living room watching us. He was silent. I put my basket down. I walked back to Donovan. I took the heavy, ridiculously expensive coat from his hand. Good morning, Donovan, I said, my voice quiet. He had already turned back to Corinne. So, my parents will be here at 4. I've told them everything is handled. The champagne is the Veuve Clicquot. Right. Not that cheap Prosecco you had last time. Of course, baby. Only the best. I stood there holding his coat, a ghost in my own daughter's life. He hadn't just dismissed me, he had erased me. And make sure the boy doesn't make a mess, he added, throwing his briefcase onto a white silk armchair. Big day. I want him perfect for the photos. After that he can, go with Esther. The boy. He never called Leo by his name. He was the boy. A prop. An accessory that came with the bride. One he was clearly planning to phase out. I walked away, his coat over my arm. I went to the hall closet, a closet bigger than my first apartment, and I hung it up. I ran my hand over the cashmere. It was soft as a lion. This was the man my daughter was marrying. A man who saw her mother as a servant, and her son as an inconvenience. And in that moment, I knew, the tiny thread of doubt I'd had, the part of me that whispered, but what about Leo? It finally snapped. I wasn't just saving myself. I was, I hoped, setting an example. Because Leo was watching, and he needed to see that you do not ever let a man like Donovan Shaw treat you like a coat rack. That night, the night before the wedding, the house was finally quiet. The rehearsal dinner, a loud garish affair at a steakhouse I was not invited to, was over. Corinne and her bridesmaids had decamped to a hotel suite downtown. Donovan was at his own penthouse. The house was empty, except for me. And Leo. He had fallen asleep in my lap, his body heavy, his breathing soft and even. He'd fought sleep, his anxiety about the wedding making him jumpy and tearful. Is Donovan going to be my new dad? He'd asked, his voice small. He'll be your mom's husband, I'd said, which was the only honest answer I could give. Oh, 'cause he doesn't like me very much, Grandma. I like you, I'd whispered, kissing his hair. I like you more than all the stars. You are my Robert's boy. You're my heart. Don't you ever forget it? I won't, he'd mumbled. And finally, he drifted off. I carried him to his own bed, a ridiculously oversized race car bed he'd never liked, and tucked him in. I looked at his face so peaceful in sleep. My heart, it just broke. Leaving him was going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done. It felt like leaving a soldier on a battlefield. But my Robert, a man of quiet, profound dignity, had once told me, Esther, you can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, not even your own kin. And I was burning. I was down to the wick. I went to my guest house. The cold air felt good on my face. Inside, I locked the door. This was my sanctuary. This was my command center. I did not turn on the main light. I turned on the small desk lamp. I sat in the old, rickety chair that Corinne had gifted me from the garage, and I opened my laptop. This, my old refurbished laptop, was my portal to the real world. It was my secret. Corinne thought I was poor. She had to. It was the only way she could justify her narrative. She, the successful, wealthy daughter, had rescued her simple, penniless mother. She needed me to be a damsel in distress, so she could be not the hero. Just the long-suffering benefactor. She had no idea about Robert's life insurance. My husband had been a postman, yes, but he'd been a meticulous, careful man. He'd invested, he'd saved. He'd also inherited his own mother's small house in Atlanta, which we'd sold at the height of the market. And I had my own pension, from 25 years as a hospital administrator. I had quit to help raise Corinne. A decision I was for the first time beginning to regret. The numbers on my private high-yield savings account glowed on the screen. It was a very, very comfortable number. Enough to buy a dozen Donovans and their stupid coats. I had never flashed it. I had been raised in a tradition where you had money, you didn't show it. Corinne had been raised in a new world where you showed money, whether you had it or not. She assumed I was living off Social Security. She had never not once asked. I clicked on my favorites tab. The link was to a small real estate listing, a 2-bedroom bungalow, Key West, Florida, 2,347 miles from here. It was painted a bright, almost obnoxious turquoise. It had a small porch with a white railing. The listing photos showed a tiny, sun-filled kitchen, hardwood floors, and best of all, a small sandy path that led directly to the ocean. I had been watching this listing for 6 months. I had flown down in secret, telling Corinne I was at a church retreat, and I had walked through it. I had smelled the salt in the air, I had felt the warm, humid breeze on my face. And I had made an offer, in cash. The plan had always been to leave, to wait until Corinne was settled in this new marriage, and then gently break the news. Corinne, I'm getting older, I need my own space. I'm moving. But her cruelty and Donovan's had changed the when. It had changed the how. I opened my email. A new message sat in my inbox. From realtor@westhomes.com. Subject: It's time, Miss Williams. The email was simple. The final closing documents were ready to be e-signed. The house was mine. All I had to do was sign. I looked at the sign here button. This was the rest of my life. A life of sunshine and dignity and peace. A life without being a servant. A life where I was Esther, not the help. My hand hovered over the mouse. But Leo. I was leaving him. I was leaving him alone with them. I closed my eyes. You can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. I could not save him, I could only save myself. And maybe one day he would understand. Maybe one day he would come and find me. I took a deep breath, and I clicked the button. The morning of the wedding was a hurricane of expensive, controlled chaos. The house was swarming with strangers, florists with armloads of white roses, caterers in black vests, a string quartet tuning in the foyer, and a team of makeup artists who had taken over the master suite, turning it into a glam room for Corinne and her shrieking, champagne-sipping bridesmaids. And I, Esther, was the eye of the storm. I was the calm, invisible center that made it all spin. Mom! Corinne yelled, her voice already shrill. The caterer doesn't know where the service entrance is. Handle it, Esther. Donovan called from the patio where he was smoking a cigar with his groomsmen. We're out of ice. Be a doll. Grandma. Leo whispered, pulling on my apron. Mommy's friends are loud. My head hurts. I handled it. I directed the caterer. I hauled a 20-pound bag of ice from the guesthouse freezer, and I set Leo up in my own, quiet room with his tablet and a peanut butter sandwich. I was the event planner. I was the quartermaster. I was the nanny. I was the only person who knew that the specific absurdly expensive brand of Belgian chocolate for the fountain was hidden in the pantry, behind the oats. I was everywhere, and I was nowhere. Around 2 p.m., the chaos began to subside. The machine was built, now it just had to run. Corinne was in her dress. A vision, as her friends kept calling her. The dress was a monstrous thing of lace and tulle, strapless and tight, a dress designed to show off her body, not to celebrate a union. I was in my own dress. A simple, navy blue lace number I'd owned for 10 years. It was my good dress. It was modest. It was dignified. Corinne, finally dressed and lacquered, saw me. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror, admiring her own reflection. She saw me in the glass, her perfectly painted brow furrowed. Mom, is that what you're wearing? It's my best dress, dear, I said evenly. It's navy, she said, as if I'd just announced I was wearing rags. The color palette is champagne, ivory, and blush. We talked about this. You never told me what to wear, Corinne. You just told me the date. She sighed, a dramatic, long-suffering sound. It's fine. It's fine. It's too late now. She turned, and for a second I thought she might thank me, for the steaming of the veil, for the handling of the caterers, for the raising of her child. She was not going to thank me. She picked up a small wilting flower from her vanity. It was a sad pale pink rose, bound in cheap white floral tape. It was an overflow corsage. It looked like something for a high school prom. Here, she said, thrusting it at me. Put this on, at least it will tie you into the color scheme. It was a payment. A token for the hired help. I took it. The pin was flimsy. Thank you, Corinne. It's lovely. Just pin it on. She turned back to the mirror, admiring her own profile. Oh, and Mom, About the seating. I knew this was coming. Yeah? Donovan's parents are very particular. They're at table 1, obviously. And I have my friends. It's just the tables are so tight. Corinne, where am I sitting? She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just fluffed her veil. We're going to have you sit in the back row during the ceremony. Just, so you don't clash with the photos. Donovan's family is very tall, and they'll be standing. It's for the best. It's just easier. Clash with the photos. I was a clash. My dark skin, my simple dress, my age. I was a problem to be handled. I was not the mother of the bride. I was an inconvenient piece of furniture. And at the reception, I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. We have a table for you. It's in the back by the DJ. You'll be with some of Donovan's cousins. You'll have a great time. It's just easier. Easier. For whom? For her. For the woman who is ashamed of the woman who gave her life. I see. I said. I looked at the sad wilting flower in my hand. This was it. This was the final straw. This was the snub that cut the last frayed thread. Of course, dear, I said, my voice as smooth as glass. Whatever is easiest for you. She smiled. A bright, relieved and utterly selfish smile. Oh, thank you, Mom. You're a lifesaver. You're the best. I knew you'd understand. She didn't know I'd understand. She counted on me not having a choice. She counted on my silence, on my passivity, on my unconditional love. She had, her entire life, mistaken my patience for weakness. It was a fatal and final miscalculation. Now, can you go get Leo? She commanded, her crisis averted. He needs to be in his suit. The photographer is here, and please make sure his face is clean. Of course, Corinne. I turned and walked out of the bridal suite. I did not hurry. I walked with a slow, deliberate dignity down the main staircase. The string quartet was practicing Pachelbel's canon. The scent of 1,000 white roses was cloying, funereal. I did not go to Leo's room. I walked out the back door. I crossed the 50 yards of perfect manicured grass. I went into my cold, silent guest house. I was still holding the corsage. The pinprick of the rose thorn was sharp against my palm. I sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. The battery was at 94%. I woke the screen up. My email was open. The message from the realtor was still there. From Realtor at Key West Homes. Subject. It's time, Miss Williams. I read the body of the email again. Dear Esther, the final closing documents for the bungalow on Sayside Lane are ready for your review. All you need to do is click the link below. E-sign and the home is officially yours. Congratulations. I looked at the ugly dying flower in my hand. Sit in the back row. Clash with the photos. I thought of my Robert. He had loved my face. He used to trace the lines around my eyes and call them rivers of light. He'd said I was a queen. And his daughter, his only child, was ashamed of me. She was putting me in the back by the kitchen like a scullery maid. My hand was shaking, but not with fear, not with sadness. It was shaking with a cold, pure and righteous rage. This was not just about me. This was about Robert. This was about his memory which they were sullying with their cheap, snobbish cruelty. I was not just leaving. I was escaping. I clicked the link. The DocuSign page opened. My name was at the bottom of a 40-page contract. I thought of Leo. My heart ached. A physical tearing pain. I can't save him, but I can save myself. I clicked the Sign Here button. My mouse moved. I scribbled my name, Esther Williams. A digital confirmation popped up. Congratulations. You are now the owner of 124 Sayside Lane, Key West, FL. It was done. I had a home. A real home. A home 2,347 miles away from this cold, white prison. I closed the laptop. I looked at the corsage. I pinned it carefully to the lapel of my 10-year-old navy blue clashing dress. I would wear it. I would wear it as a badge of honor. A reminder of the moment I chose myself. I stood up. I was no longer a servant. I was a homeowner. I was a free woman. I was just waiting for my ride. But first I had to go to a wedding. Grandma? Leo was standing in the doorway of the guest house, already in his tiny perfect tuxedo. You've been in here a long time, he said, his eyes big and worried. I smiled. And for the first time in 5 years it was a real, genuine and truly happy smile. I know, baby, I said, taking his small warm hand. I was just booking a trip. Come on, let's go see your mother get married. The hours leading up to the ceremony were a blur of performance. I was a ghost in the machine, a silent, smiling, navy blue-clad coordinator. I was the one who found Donovan's lucky cufflinks, the ones he'd left in the guest room. I was the one who bribed Leo with a cookie to stand still for the photographer. I was the one who produced a bottle of Tylenol for Corin's splitting headache, which was really just a champagne hangover. I was, as my daughter had said, a lifesaver. And I knew, with the cold certainty of an executioner, that this was the last day I would ever save her. My new freedom gave me a strange, almost out-of-body perspective. I was no longer a participant in this drama. I was just an audience member, watching the final terrible act of a play I'd been trapped in for years. I saw things I had never allowed myself to see before. I saw Corinne, my daughter, not as a vision but as a terrified woman in a dress she couldn't afford, marrying a man she didn't love, but needed. Her beauty was a currency and she was cashing it in for the last time. I saw Donovan, the groom, not as a master but as a deeply insecure man who had to buy his authority. He wasn't marrying Corinne, he was acquiring a beautiful, well-bred accessory and a house that he intended to fill with his things, starting with his own family. I saw his parents, the elder Shaws, arrive. They were tall, thin, and pale, with the casual arrogance of old money. They did not hug Corinne. Mrs. Shaw simply air-kissed her, her eyes scanning the dress. "Lovely," she'd said, her tone implying it was anything but. When Corinne, flustered, had tried to introduce me, "This is my mother, Esther," Mrs. Shaw had simply looked through me. She'd given me a thin, polite, dismissive smile, the kind one gives to a waitress, and had turned back to Donovan. Corinne, to her credit, had flushed red with shame, but she had said nothing. She had just let it happen. She had let her future mother-in-law erase her actual mother. And I, calm and free, had simply smiled my polite, neutral smile, and offered to take Mrs. Shaw's coat. The final command, the last nail in the coffin, came just before Corinne walked down the aisle. The guests were seated, the string quartet was playing. I was in the foyer, holding Leo's hand ready to walk him to his seat. In the back, Corinne, looking frantic, her veil askew, rushed over. "Mom, please," she hissed, her voice a low, desperate command. "Don't talk to Donovan's family. Please. You don't get their humor. They're very dry. You'll embarrass me. Just smile and stay with Leo, okay? Just stay out of the way, please, for me. This is my day. You'll embarrass me." There it was, the truth, stripped bare. All the lies about photos and clashing were gone. I was an embarrassment. My life, my face, my history, it was a stain on her perfect white, new life. I looked at my daughter, the child I had nursed, the teenager I had guided, the woman I had supported. "Don't you worry, Corinne," I said, my voice soft and kind. "I won't say a word to anyone. I understand completely." Her shoulders slumped in relief. "Oh, thank you, Mom. You're the best." "Yes," I said. I took Leo's hand. "Come on, baby. Let's go find our seats." "But Grandma," he'd whispered as I led him down the long aisle, past the rows of Donovan's staring, whispering, white-gloved friends. "Why are we in the back? We're family." "Hush, Leo," I'd said, squeezing his hand. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be. Just watch the show." The backyard had been transformed. When Robert and I had visited, this had been a simple lawn, a place for a little boy to run. Now it was a sterile, white, open-air cathedral of Corinne's ambition. A massive tent open to the sides sheltered hundreds of white chairs, all facing an altar drowning in a cascade of white roses. The air was thick with their cloying funeral parlor scent. I sat in the last chair, in the last row, as instructed. It was not a row really. It was a single solitary chair set just behind the main block of seating, next to a large potted fern that smelled of damp earth. It was the chair for the undesirable, the clash. I was, quite literally, sitting in the corner. Leo sat beside me on a small matching folding chair that the wedding planner had probably intended for a handbag. He was small and straight in his tiny tuxedo, his hand gripping mine. "You're squeezing, Grandma," he whispered. "Sorry, baby." I loosened my grip. My hand was clammy. The string quartet, which had been playing something modern and thin, swelled into Pachelbel's canon. The signal. Everyone stood. I stood too. From my vantage point, I could see everything. I could see the sea of pale, wealthy faces, all turned backward. I saw Donovan's parents in the front row. His mother, a severe woman in a pale gray suit, looked bored. Then Corinne appeared, on the arm of a man I didn't know, not one of her uncles, not a friend of the family. He was, I realized, Donovan's business partner, a strategic choice. My daughter was a vision. I will give her that. The dress was magnificent, a spray of lace and crystals that glittered in the afternoon sun. Her veil trailed behind her. But her face, I knew that face. It was her performance face. The smile was bright, but her eyes were tight. She was not a bride walking to her future. She was an actress, walking to her mark, desperate not to flub her lines. She reached the altar. Donovan, who had been staring straight ahead, took her hand. He didn't smile at her. He smirked at the crowd. A look what I got gesture. The vows began. They had of course written their own. Donovan spoke first. His voice a confident, practiced baritone. He talked about synergy and partnership. He talked about finding a woman whose public-facing aesthetic matched his own personal brand. He called her his greatest acquisition. People laughed. They thought it was a joke. I knew it was the most honest thing he'd ever said. Then it was Corinne's turn. Her voice was high, and a little shaky. She'd memorized it. She talked about Donovan's strength, his vision, his uncompromising drive for excellence. She thanked him for leveling up her life. She was not describing a husband. She was describing a new, high-paying and very demanding job. Neither of them mentioned love. Not once. They mentioned loyalty and family and building an empire. But not a single word about tenderness or sacrifice or kindness. Leo's part was small. He was the ring bearer. He walked forward, holding a white satin pillow. He did it perfectly. He stood in front of Donovan holding up the rings. Donovan took his and then, instead of thanking him, he just ruffled Leo's hair. A dismissive, good boy gesture that made my grandson flinch. Corinne didn't even look at her son. Her eyes were locked on Donovan. I do, Donovan boomed. I do? Corinne whispered, her voice trembling with relief. The efficient, a man I didn't recognize, pronounced them a new dynamic partnership. They kissed. It was a long, deep and public kiss. A seal on a contract. I sat down. My heart, which should have been breaking, felt nothing. It was not grief. It was not sadness. It was the quiet, profound click of a lock disengaging. I was not losing a daughter. I had lost her years ago, to an enemy I couldn't fight, her own, ravenous and deeply insecure ambition. This wasn't a wedding. It was a funeral. My daughter, the one I had raised, was gone. And this new glittering hard-eyed woman, Mrs. Donovan Shaw, was a stranger. I felt finished. The house in Key West, the turquoise bungalow, flashed in my mind. It was waiting for me. I was finished here. The last tie had been cut, not by me but by her. You may now kiss the bride, the officiant had said. But I knew the truth. I was the one who had just been released. The reception was held in a different, even more massive tent on the other side of the property. If the ceremony was a sterile cathedral, this was a sterile palace. A 10-piece band, complete with a brass section, was already playing a jaunty, soulless funk. A cake at least 6 feet tall towered in a corner, a monument to Donovan's ego and Corinne's credit card. The air was thick with the smell of champagne and expensive perfume. The seating chart was the first real test of my new, detached calm. It was a massive, calligraphed mirror, set on an easel at the entrance. The guests, in their expensive suits and silk dresses, crowded around it, looking for their names, their social value reflected back at them. I waited until the crowd thinned. I walked up to the mirror, my navy blue dress and sad wilting corsage feeling like a costume. I looked for my name. Table 1, the Shaw family. Table 2, the bridal party. Table 3, friends of Donovan, finance. Table 4, friends of Corinne, old college. I kept scanning. Table 5. Table 6. All the way to 12, all filled with names I didn't know. People Corinne had met in the last 2 years. People who mattered. My name was not there. My heart gave a small, painful lurch. She didn't. She couldn't. Then I saw it. At the very bottom, in a small cramped script, almost an afterthought. Table 14, Williams. Shaw cousins, vendors. Not Esther Williams. Not mother of the bride. Just Williams. A problem filed away. I found table 14. It was exactly where I knew it would be. It was in the furthest, darkest corner of the tent. shoved up against the thick canvas flap that led to the catering tent. Every 30 seconds a waiter would burst through, bringing with him a blast of hot, greasy air and the sound of clanging dishes. A massive, thrumming speaker aimed at the dance floor was 2 feet from my chair, making the floor vibrate. I had my table mates. A very young man in a hoodie, who I realized was the DJ's assistant, already tapping at his laptop. A shy-looking young couple who introduced themselves as Donovan's third cousins from a state I'd never heard of, and a woman in a black pantsuit, furiously typing on her phone, who was the wedding planner's day of coordinator. This was the island of misfit toys. The clashing table, the table for people who take up space. I sat down, the chair was wobbly. The shy cousins tried to make conversation. "Are you a friend of the family?" the young woman asked. "Something like that," I said, unfolding my napkin. I ate my food. It was served last and it was cold. The sea bass was dry. The asparagus was limp. I didn't care. I watched the first dance, Corinne and Donovan on the dance floor, moving through a series of obviously rehearsed, overly sexual Roomba steps. It wasn't a dance, it was a mating display, designed to incite envy, not warmth. They were performing and they were performing well. My eyes found Leo. He was at the head table, as promised. But he was at the far, far end, next to a bridesmaid who was already on her 4th glass of champagne, and was ignoring him. He was in his tiny suit, pushing a piece of dry chicken around his plate, his face small and lost. He looked like a tiny abandoned astronaut, stranded on a hostile glittering planet. He looked up, his eyes scanning the massive, loud room. He was looking for me. His eyes found mine. Table 14, the dark corner. I gave him a small reassuring wave. He didn't wave back, his face just crumpled, just a little. He knew. He knew we had been separated. He knew we had been put in our places. My heart ached. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." But my resolve hardened. I was not leaving him with them. I was leaving him to them. They had made this choice. They had drawn this battle line, and they had no idea what they had just done. I was a free woman. I was just waiting for the toast. I had a feeling it would be a good one. The clinking of a spoon on a glass, a high, thin shing 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 cut through the music. The band mid-funk breakdown tapered off. The room fell into a boozy, expectant hush. A spotlight, hot and white, found Donovan. He was standing, his jacket off, his tie loosened, a glass of champagne in his hand. He was in his element. "Wow," he said, his voice smooth. "What a night. What a woman." He pulled Corinne in for a kiss, and the crowd whistled. He gave his toast. It was short, arrogant, and to the point. He thanked his parents for showing him what an empire looks like. He thanked his groomsmen for not messing up the stocks while he was gone, and he thanked his bride. "To Corinne," he said, raising his glass. "My beautiful wife, the ultimate asset." The crowd laughed. They thought he was being charmingly edgy. I heard the word for what it was, a balance sheet entry. Then, Corinne stood up. She had of course changed. The massive wedding gown was gone, replaced by a slinky champagne-colored silk dress that clung to her like a second skin. She was on her 3rd glass of champagne, and her eyes were glittering with a hard manic brightness. This was her victory lap. She had done it. She had closed the deal. She was Mrs. Donovan Shaw. She took the microphone. "Oh, Donnie," she purred. "Stop, you'll make me blush." She held her glass up. Wow. Just, wow. I have to thank so many people for making this dream a reality." She started with Donovan's parents. "To Mr. and Mrs. Shaw," she gushed, her voice thick with a fawning sincerity that made my stomach turn. Thank you for welcoming me into your incredible family. I have so much to learn from you." Mrs. Shaw, in the front row, gave a thin reptilian smile, and barely raised her glass. Corinne moved on. "To my king," she said, looking at Donovan. "You built this castle and I am so honored to be your queen." She thanked her fabulous friends, her bridesmaids, who shrieked in response. She thanked the wedding planner for her genius. She thanked the band for bringing the vibe. The list went on, a roll call of everyone who had contributed to the perfection of her day. I sat in the back, at table 14. I took a sip of my water. She hadn't, I noted, thanked her mother. She had not, I noted, mentioned her son. I was invisible. I was the help. And then, her eyes, scanning the room, lit up with the predatory champagne-fueled confidence of a woman who has just won everything, found the dark corner. She found table 14. She found me. Her smile, which had been wide and generic, tightened. It became specific. It became cruel. I saw the flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Me. The navy blue clash. The dark spot in her perfect, ivory and blush world. The problem she'd had to handle by seating me next to the kitchen. A normal person, a person with a heart, would have felt a pang of guilt. A moment of, oh God, that's my mother back there. Corinne was not a normal person. She was a Shaw. She processed the guilt, the annoyance, the shame, and in a terrible, brilliant, social predator move, she weaponized it. She was going to make a joke, and I was going to be the punchline. Corinne's smile became bright, brittle, and performative. She was now speaking, not to the whole room but directly to me. A beam of focused, toxic energy from her spotlight to my dark corner. As I stand here tonight, she began, her voice tinkling with that false, light-hearted tone she used right before she said something truly vicious. As Mrs. Donovan Shaw, I've been thinking. She paused, for dramatic effect. The room was silent, hanging on her every drunken word. I've been thinking a lot, she continued, about what it takes to build a perfect life. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. This was not going to be good. You have to be so selective, she said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. You have to curate your world. You know, she gestured at the glittering tent. The white roses, the beautiful rich people. You have to fill your life with only the best. She raised her glass, first to Donovan, then to his parents. The best man, the best family, the best friends. Her eyes, cold and glittering, swung back to me. To table 14. And you learn, she said, her voice dropping. You learn that in a perfect life, in a life that matters, some people are the stars of the show. She gestured to herself, to Donovan, to the head table, the in-crowd, the people who mattered. The air in the tent was still. The shy cousins at my table were staring at their plates. The DJ's assistant had stopped typing. They all knew instinctively that this was an execution. Corinne let the silence hang for a beat. She was enjoying this. She was in front of 200 of her new powerful friends, finally putting her embarrassing clashing mother in her place. Some people, they shine, she said, and then the final, fatal twisting of the knife. And others, her smile was a razor blade. She was looking right at me. Others just take up space. She paused, and then to make sure the knife went all the way in, to make sure everyone knew exactly who the other was, she added, with a tinkling, awful laugh. Right, Mom? My God. She had said it, out loud. She had just in front of her new husband, his family and everyone she knew, called her own mother, the woman who had raised her, the woman who was currently raising her son, a waste of space. A few nervous titters started. It was a joke. It had to be a joke, right? It was too cruel, too monstrous, to be real. I felt the blood drain from my face. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was a direct hit. A public execution. A child taking a social machete to her own mother, just to get a laugh, just to prove to her new family that she was one of them. The room was waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to cry, waiting for me to shrink, waiting for me to confirm that I was, in fact, just space. And in that moment, in that terrible silent spotlight of humiliation, I thought of the turquoise bungalow in Key West. I thought of my husband Robert, and his rivers of light. I was not space. I was a person. And I was done. The silence in the tent stretched for 1, 2, 3 seconds. It was a stunned, horrified. Did she really just say that? Silence. The cruelty was so naked, so specific, that no one knew what to do. And then, the first laugh came. It wasn't a titter, it was a bark. Donovan. He threw his head back, his face triumphant, and he laughed. He loved it. It was the funniest, truest thing he had ever heard. It was, after all, his own philosophy. There were assets, and there was overhead, stars and space takers. He had just married a woman who understood the difference. He grabbed Corinne's arm. That's my girl. He boomed and kissed her hard on the hand. Donovan's laugh was a signal. It was permission. It gave the rest of the head table the cue they were waiting for. Donovan's mother, the severe woman in gray, let out a thin reptilian smile. Dry humor, I thought. Yes. Dry as a bone. Dry as a grave. Donovan's father chuckled. A low, appreciative, that's how you handle a problem sound. And then Corinne's friends, the bridesmaids, they exploded. "Oh my God, Corinne, you are terrible," one of them shrieked, which I knew in their language meant, "That was amazing." "Savage," yelled another, and they burst into a fresh round of high-pitched drunken cackles. The rest of the room, the guests who were not in on the joke, took their cue from the head table. They didn't laugh, not really, but they chuckled, a low, polite, "This is apparently a family joke" rumble of laughter. They were laughing to break the tension. They were laughing because the rich, powerful people at the front of the room were laughing. The laughter washed over me, over table 14, in a wave of hot, public, soul-scalding humiliation. The shy cousins at my table were now staring at their laps, their faces burning with second-hand shame. The DJ's assistant looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. They were all laughing at me. The simple old navy blue-clad woman in the back, the space taker. I didn't look at Corinne. I didn't look at Donovan. I looked across the room at the head table. At the far, far end, I looked at Leo. He was not laughing. He was in his tiny suit, his chair pushed back. He was watching his mother and her new laughing family. His face was pale. His eyes were wide. He was terrified. He knew with the pure, simple instinct of a child that a terrible, terrible thing had just happened. He knew his mother had just, with a laugh, thrown her own mother under a bus. And then his eyes, big and dark and full of a knowledge no 8-year-old should have, found mine. His face was a question. "Grandma, are you okay?" He saw me. And in that moment, everything I had ever been, the grief, the patience, the passivity, the role of the silent, accommodating servant, it all burned away. The laughter, the cruelty, the disrespect, it wasn't a weight. It was a propellant. I was not sad. I was not hurt. I was done. I felt a smile, a real one, touch my lips. Corinne, in her arrogance, had just given me the most perfect public and glorious execu I could have ever dreamed of. She thought she was ending the joke. I knew I was about to end the show. The laughter was just starting to die down. Corinne was glowing, flushed with her triumph, her champagne and the approval of her new terrible family. Donovan had his arm around her, the picture of a proud conquering hero. They were waiting for the applause to fade, so they could move on to the cake cutting. And in the back of the room at table 14 a chair scraped. It was not a loud sound, but in the tapering silence it was a gunshot. Every head in the room, every single head, turned. It was me. I was standing up. My knees were shaking, but I locked them. I was wearing my 10-year-old navy blue dress, and my sad, wilting pink corsage. I was, by every measure in that room, the least important person there. I was the space taker. Corinne saw me. Her smile froze. Her face in a split second flashed with pure unadulterated annoyance. I was ruining her moment. I was in her mind about to cry. I was about to make a scene. I was about to embarrass her after she had just so beautifully embarrassed me. "Mom," she said, her voice a tight warning hiss. "Sit down." But I didn't sit down. I smiled. It was not a weak smile. It was not a sad smile. It was a calm, broad, beatific smile. The kind of smile you see on a woman who has absolutely and unequivocally just won. I didn't have a microphone. I didn't need one. My voice, the voice that had raised a child, run a hospital wing and soothed a dying husband, was clear, and it was cold. "You are so right, Corinne," I said. My voice carried. The silence in the tent was no longer boozy and expectant. It was absolute. The band, the caterers, the guests, everyone stopped. My daughter stared at me, her smile now a rictus of confusion. "What?" "You are so right," I repeated, my voice projecting calm and clear as a bell. "It is so important to know who matters, and even more important," I continued, my smile widening, "to not take up space where you're not wanted." I let that hang in the air for a perfect, terrible second. Corinne's face was white. Donovan's arm was still around her, but he was no longer smiling. He was calculating. His asset was talking back. "I thought about what you said, Corinne," I said, "about clashing with the photos, about taking up space, and I thought, she's right, I need to get my own space." Corinne's mouth opened, but no sound came out. And then, I delivered the line. The line I had been holding in my heart for an hour. The line that was my liberation. "So I thought you'd be happy to know," I said, my voice full of a terrible, joyous, liberating peace. "I finally took that lesson to heart. Good thing I just bought my own home." I beamed, as if I were sharing the best news in the world. A lovely little turquoise bungalow, right on the beach, in Key West. 2,347 miles from here. I looked right at Corinne. Her face was a mask of slow-motion, catastrophic horror. I gave her my biggest, warmest, most maternal smile. Don't you worry about a thing, sweetheart. You'll never have to see me again. The silence that followed was not a void. It was a judgment. It was the sound of 200 people all realizing at the exact same time that they had laughed at the wrong person. They had backed the wrong horse. The joke was not a joke. It was a resignation. Corinne's face. Oh, her face. It was a masterpiece of shattering illusion. Her smile, the one that had been frozen, didn't just fade, it shattered. Her jaw unhinged. The color, the champagne blush, the perfect makeup, it all drained away, leaving a pale, terrified, 30-something woman in a 30... What? She whispered. It was a pathetic, reedy sound. What? What did you say, Mom? Donovan, her new powerful husband, was no help. He wasn't looking at Corinne, he was looking at me. And he was not confused. He was furious. His face was dark. He was an investment banker. His free, live-in household manager, nanny, chef and housekeeper had just publicly and spectacularly liquidated her position. This was a bad deal. Mom, Corinne shrieked, her voice cracking, finding its true selfish, panicked pitch. What are you talking about? You can't. Key West. I didn't answer her. The show was over. I had spoken my last line. My business there was finished. I turned from the table, my wobbly chair scraping the floor. But I did not walk to the exit. I walked, my back straight, my head high, past the DJ, past the dance floor, past the stunned, silent, staring guests. I walked right up to the head table. I walked past the gasping, horrified bridesmaids. I walked past Donovan, who looked like he wanted to throttle me. I walked past my daughter, who was now openly weeping, her face a mess of running mascara. Mom, stop. You're ruining this. I walked right up to the end of the table. I walked to my grandson. Leo was standing up on his chair, his eyes wide. He was watching me with a look of pure, unadulterated, terrified awe. I knelt. My old knees cracked, but I didn't care. I was for the first time at eye level with the only person in the room who mattered. I put my hands on his tiny tuxedo-clad shoulders. Be a good boy, Leo, I whispered, so only he could hear. The string quartet in their confusion had started playing again. No one could hear me. I love you more than all the stars, you hear me? He nodded, his eyes filling with tears. You're leaving? I am, baby, I said, my own voice finally breaking, just for him. But I am not leaving you. I am just going to my new house. And you remember who you are. You're a Williams, you are my Roberts boy. And you, I pressed a kiss to his forehead, can always find me. Mom! Mom! Corinne was screaming now, a full-blown hysterical, how dare you shriek. Get away from my son. Security. Someone. I stood up. I looked at my daughter, my crying, ruined, selfish daughter, and then I did the last thing I would ever do for her. I turned, and I walked away. I walked across the dance floor. I walked down the long white carpeted aisle. I did not run. I did not look back. Mom, you get back here. I heard her from the stage. She had the microphone again. Her voice boomed raw and panicked, across the entire silent reception. You can't leave. Who's going to watch Leo tomorrow? We have a honeymoon. Mom, the final desperate true sentence. The plea of a woman who had not lost her mother but her nanny. I pushed through the flap of the tent. I was out. The night air was cool, and it smelled like freedom. At the end of the long gravel driveway, just as I had planned, a yellow taxi was waiting. The light on its roof was on. I got in. I did not look back at the big, white, sterile house, or the glittering, terrible tent. Airport, ma'am? The driver asked. I smiled, my first real, deep and truly peaceful breath filling my lungs. No, I said, pulling the sad, wilting corsage from my dress and dropping it on the floor. The bus station. I've got a 6 a.m. to Key West, and I don't want to be late.